Welcome to the Daily Wrap-Up, a concise show dedicated to bringing you the most relevant independent news as we see it from the last 24 hours. Thursday, June 18th, 2020. Thank you for joining me today. Part 2 of the late up edition. Thank you for joining me today. I apologize I haven't been able to get to more content in the last couple of days. Hey, between you and I, I'm not doing too well. I'm alive. I'm okay. My back is just really, really struggling right now. But it's okay because it's only going to be a matter of time. That's all anything is, a matter of time. And I'm not going to stop. So at the end of the day, it's just a little bit of an inconvenience, as it were. But I'm going to keep doing this as best I can in the meantime. Now, there's a really big topic going on right now that I feel like very few people are in even barely paying attention to. If even within that, fully understanding the grasp of, or the scope of what I feel this really is showing us. And of course, this has been the topic of BlackRock, and something that I've been focusing on recently, a little bit further in the past, but really trying to dive into for you guys to understand what this really means. And in my opinion, that I feel is 100% backed up by the facts around this story. This is 2008. Times whatever you want, times 10. This is the new evolution, or maybe it's a combination of 2008 mixed with the Flexner report, mixed with the Standard Oil kind of monopoly idea, which is where I took that image from for the main image today, using Larry Fink's picture on it, from CEO of BlackRock. But this is another one of these events. This is another kind of massive financial elite, scientific elite, medical elite driven shift in our society into something that gives them more control, more financial benefits, I guess, at the end of the day. But really, it comes down to the control, being able to influence things in the direction they want that benefit them in ways that are simply not possibly monetized, things that you can't even wrap your mind around how much it gives to these people, more than just money. But for those who don't know what it is, BlackRock is the largest asset management fund company in the world. Now, there is $7 trillion in assets worldwide, as I understand it, and that changes to 27 trillion different financial issues there. But for you guys to understand, the point is that this is the largest asset management company in the world. They now have control over the U.S. Treasury. And as much as QAnon is trying to convince you that that means Trump now has control over the Fed, that's not true at all. And I will get into this today and show you why, in my opinion, this has been built up. And this isn't just Donald Trump. Trump is just the president that was in place while this took place. He's just as much a puppet, in my opinion, as Obama and Bush and everyone else before him. Whether that means he has no idea what's happening around him, or he's letting it happen, or whatever variation they're in. It's not just about Donald Trump. This is something that's been happening for a very long time. The pieces have been put in place as we've been marching forward, well before Trump's administration. And because of COVID-19, whatever you want this envision that may be, or not there at all, it was used to scare you into a corner to where you did not see the actual largest transfer of wealth that's happened in this country's history. Way bigger than 2008. And we're still going, by the way. Just told you the other day in the last show about the Pentagon is now bailing out weapons companies, right? With your money. Well, you can't feed your family. Lovely stuff. We're going to get a little bit more into in a moment about the money going to Israel still, $3.8 billion over the next year. Again, this is the new contract, and this is while we are struggling, while Americans don't have jobs, and they're already just making legislation and passing it in a block of 15 bills without even reading the names. I wonder why that would be. 3 of them had to do with Israel, Golan Heights, and all this different stuff in the middle of this thing. Why would that be? Because there's people in powerful positions that do not align with any kind of nationality, any kind of country, that are driving these things. The kind of overt control they have over our country that people are not paying attention to, and the two-party system is stopping anybody from really doing anything about it. One side of that false paradigm is pointing to Russia. One side is pointing to China, both of which we should be concerned about in a myriad of ways. But in regard to this topic, those are the only things that matter. And of course, they miss the actual real issues that are right in front of you. All over the place. BlackRock is only one of those issues. Now, to start off, I want to show you guys a comment that was made from somebody on this last video I just did, the BlackRock Takeover of America, brought to you by COVID-19. And no, it's not just America. That's the point. That's what the picture shows you on the front. And those that have been following this show and listening to me, not just reading the titles, they know This is a takeover of the world, in my opinion. This is why they're the largest asset manager of the world. This is a financial takeover, and through that, a further takeover of any number of things around the world. The United States being a huge part of that, right? The financial leader, the military leader, if you will. Meaning, I guess the way that's framed today is the most powerful leaders, the last word I would use. But that is more than just the United States. All that happened just now between the beginning of this whole pandemic scare and now is that BlackRock has officially cemented itself as completely in control, holding the reins of the direction of our financial future of this country. And through that, control over our government, which then has control over every other aspect of our life. That's where we are right now. But let me take a step back for a moment, and we'll get into it entirely right to start. But I want to show you this comment. Now, as always, I'm not trying to call anybody out. Okay? Everybody out there, as always, and I try to temper myself with this too. These are the people we're trying to help, right? We're trying to, and I could be wrong too, by the way. I'm not trying to be some savior here trying to reach you. The point is, we all could possibly be wrong. I believe we're correct in this situation. So what do? You try to do your best to give them the correct information while considering what they're saying as well. In this case, I find this to be insultingly untrue. And that either means that she hasn't done her own due diligence and just parroting something that somebody said, or part of the problem. Either way, it says the Defense Production Act was used to merge the Fed with the Treasury. Now, I'm not even going to get into how incredibly wrong that is. The point that these are blending, it doesn't even matter. The point is, she's making the point that because they did this, which didn't happen, blending the Fed and the Treasury, and I'm not going to get into the nuance of it in regard to specifically the Defense Production Act, reversing the unconstitutional act of 1871, Ulysses Grant used that was the beginning of the release of our money. I don't even know what that means. I understand the terms. I understand what happened in 1871. I know who Ulysses S. Grant is. I just don't think there's everything written correctly there. But it says the chair of the executive branch is now in control of the Fed. That's the point. That's what is meant to be given to you from this Q manipulation. And that is Trump, of course. Now we have control of our money again. Look at how that worked. Right? Isn't that funny how this is working? How suddenly, Guantanamo is a bastion of freedom because we're going to put bad people there, right? So that's exactly what Obama said, but, it doesn't matter now. Of course, now because a foreign overtly tied company, and by the way, excuse me, let me be very clear here. It is an American company that is very clearly tied to the Israeli government. Now, I've been saying private company because bottom line is a company that is not on surface level connected like some government institution. However, I was saying that incorrectly. Just for people out there, I'm sure most of you knew what I was saying. The point is a private company necessarily is a company that is not traded publicly. This is traded publicly. But the point, that doesn't change what I was saying about it. The point is it's still a company that's not a government entity. That's the point. So we have a company with its own interests, with its own motivations, with its own profit motives that are making decisions using your money that drive the direction of our country. I mean, it's just as alarming as the Fed. The Federal Reserve, even though they say the Fed is a private company. This is a private it's a bank. It is not a federal government organization. That is what's so crazy about it. But, of course, now that, and I'm glad I just remembered to point this out. It's interesting to find out that the Federal Reserve website now has .gov in it. This is just a random side point, by the way, that I forgot I wanted to mention. Now, the reason this is so interesting to me, as you guys just want to make sure you can see the actual URL. Here we go. Just so you guys can see this, because I find this to be very interesting. The Federal Reserve is not a government institution. It is not a part of the government. However, under Trump's administration, for whatever reason, it's now become a .gov website. Right? Now, of course, the Q people will say, well, that's because he has control. That doesn't even matter, by the way. It's not even a government organization. So there should never be any point where they say, look, give you more illusion as if you're part of the government, because that's what they want. But now that they've given control to a non-government entity that's controlled, has clear ties to a foreign government, that now drives the direction of our policy in this country, I find it incredibly alarming that they now make the Fed even more so appear to be part of the government, right? That is the illusion. That's what's happening. Now, real quick, back to this comment, as well as the silent takeover of the Vatican, of course, which, by the way, I'm not even disparaging. There's plenty of stuff going on there. But the point here is this is trying to conflate this idea. Now, what I said is, first of all, the executive branch, meaning the government, had control over our money. If they had control over our money, that would be about the furthest thing from we have control. It would still be they have control. You see, this is the problem. The main problem is that Q has warped the minds of a whole generation right back into blindly trusting the very government they think they're fighting. Now, that's exactly like the left, by the way, with Russiagate. It's their version of Q. But your point about the Fed is ridiculous and demonstrably false. It just takes moments and only a small concern for the facts to see that this is a private company. Now, again, I should just go in there and change that, but it doesn't even make a difference because the point I'm making, which I think comes across of what I'm saying, is that it's not a government entity that is now in control of the U.S. Treasury. That is the opposite direction of what you are falsely telling people, right? So all it did is you take the Federal Reserve, who is already a bank, and then give it over to another company that is even more so. The BlackRock is essentially the bank for these larger government entities, right? U.S. Treasury, you can't just go to Bank of America, right? It goes to the BlackRock entities, which then give loans and different things. That is not a company that you want running the Treasury. That's as if the bank now has control over your finances. I mean, think about the analogy there, guys. Whatever bank that you work with right now, imagine if that bank suddenly then had, because you just weren't paying your bills or because of some whatever pandemic happened and you couldn't afford to pay your bills, suddenly now the bank owns your house. Suddenly now the bank gets to decide how and your money goes forward. That's what's happening now. That's what BlackRock is doing for the U.S. government. Now, just even on its surface level, that should be alarming to us because that is not what we are being told as Americans. It says your kind of lie, whatever you realize, whether you realize it or not, is by far the most dangerous and damaging to actual change. Please, please, please do your due diligence and stop blindly following conjecture and reaching conclusions based on entirely on two-party talking points, otherwise known as Q. Here is what I said about this right when I posted it, and this is what I said. No, Q, the Trump admin-authorized BlackRock takeover of the U.S. Treasury did not give Trump control of the Fed. It allowed an Israeli government-tied company to take control over the U.S. Treasury, and the two-party deception will keep you focused anywhere else. Anywhere else. Now, I know I had another point in there that I thought I remembered all of a sudden that I just forgot, but here, let's get into the main point here, guys. Now, that, again, in and of itself is something that should be alarming to us. A company that has its own interests, right? That will, and by the way, on top of this, things that I'm going to try to remember from previous shows, we know that right now they've got a very lucrative situation with no bid contracts and selling their ETFs and basically bailing themselves out with U.S. money. That's what's happening. And in addition to everything else. Now, somebody mentioned earlier on in the chat that the BlackRock got bailout money. That's not how this is working. They're not like a Boeing that got a bunch of money as a bailout that can do what they want. BlackRock is now in control of that money. And this is what you have to understand. And realizing when they have control over that, essentially control over the Fed and the Treasury, it's not like Trump now has control of this, right? You could argue that's the case, but I think what I'm going to show you here is the other way around. That BlackRock, in my opinion, and this is based on my information and my research and what I've seen, I hope you'll come to your own opinions on it, has complete control over the direction of the U.S. government, as well as a lot of other countries like Canada and plenty of others that we've already pointed out. But check this out. So BlackRock in 1998 was essentially created. 1999, they went public. Now, in 2007 was when BlackRock created its Israeli market. Now, you could argue, and again, I want to be very clear here that when I'm talking about this stuff, I'm in no way insinuating that that all of the Jewish people are somehow tied into what I'm talking about. I mean what I say, and I'm very clearly talking about the Israeli government and its potential control over the U.S. government. Right? And of course, there's obvious parts that the Jewish people tie into that, just like anything that the U.S. government does. There's Christian people that tie into, or any number of other religions that are allowed here, like they're not allowed over in Israel. We'll leave that alone. But the point is that this market was created in 2007. Now, you could argue that at that time it was because that was the direction, or that at some point along the line, this company was overtaken by the interests of the Israeli government. That's just my take again. This is my opinion on this. Now, follow me here. 2007 is when they established this. Now, understand that in 2008 is when we had our crisis, right? So 2007, you could argue that there's at least a clear Israeli government influence. I think it started way before that. But it says the U.S. government contracted with BlackRock to help resolve the fallout of the financial meltdown of 2008. Now remember, they were working with them in 2007. So right at the same time frame. So 2007 is when Israel has a huge market of BlackRock in regard to in Israel. 2007 and 8 is when they're involved with the U.S. government in regard to the biggest at the time financial collapse of this country, at least living memory. According to Vanity Fair, the financial establishment in Washington and on Wall Street believed BlackRock was the best choice for the job. Now, in 2009, BlackRock, at that time, after investing and basically greatly benefiting from the collapse in the United States, that's when they became the number one asset manager worldwide. So you could argue that because of this issue that was happened or coaxed or created, and we know our own people were involved in this in regard to our own U.S. government officials, that because of all this, they benefited. BlackRock wildly benefited from the collapse of 2008, and it rocketed them right up to the number one asset manager of the world in 2009. Now, in April 2009, BlackRock acquired R3 Capital Management, who took control over $1.5 billion fund. 2009, Barclays sold its global investors unit, which includes its exchange-traded fund business. Now, you can find ties between this to damn near everything. Now, understand as well, when I'm talking about the takeover of America, that does not mean that they're not tied to plenty of other. There's clear deals going on with China and all over the place. Right? This is not a two-party argument, guys. This is not some backhanded way to make it seem like Trump is innocent and China's guilty. Right? We have to see that there's more going on than these reductive narratives. They're all part of this. Merrill Lynch and Bear Stearns, I mean, they're tied to all of this stuff. Now, 2008, 2009, we can see that they benefited from this crisis, which did happen, by the way. Now it says, and this is even on Wikipedia, on the BlackRock information, it says, due to its power and its sheer size and scope of its financial assets and activities, BlackRock has been called the world's largest shadow bank. Well, that sure sounds lovely, right? Even on their own information as well. Guess what they define this as? The shadow banking system is a term for the collection of a non-bank financial intermediaries that provide services similar to traditional commercial banks, but outside normal banking regulations. Great. That's fantastic, right? Let me say that again. The shadow banking system, which is what they're right now, it says, due to its power, BlackRock has been called the world's largest shadow bank. Shadow banking is a collection of non-bank financial intermediaries like BlackRock that provide services similar to traditional commercial banks, but outside normal banking regulations. So basically just, free for all. The phrase shadow banking contains pejorative connotation of back alley loan sharks. Many in the financial service industries find this phrase offensive and prefer the euphemism market-based finance. I'm sure they do. Okay, well, let's jump forward to 2010, all right? So just a few years, 2010. After they profited wildly off the collapse of 2008. Larry Fink's $12 trillion shadow, April 2010. This says, in this article from Vanity Fair, BlackRock's enormous and growing influence and its sheer size, too big to fail, some say, has begun to raise questions. This is in 2010, guys. 10 years ago, people were already getting nervous about what this company was becoming. Too big to fail, right? So think about how ridiculous it is that we're being told that our company, these banks are too big to fail in our country in 2008, right? BlackRock essentially absorbs all of this and grows crazy, and now they're too big to fail. Funny, right? It's almost like they didn't stop the problem at all, but just used it. It says, it's like the Blackwater finance, almost a shadow government. It's like the Blackwater of finance, almost a shadow government. 2010, mainstream media. Well, gee, I agree. It seems pretty clearly like a shadow government stemming back to foreign entities that are influencing and I would argue controlling where this is going in our country. But okay, what does one mainstream media comment have to do with anything, right? Just something to lay the context. Let's jump forward to 2016. 2016, December, right? So don't be fooled by this over here. This is today's date right here, December 2nd, 2016. So a month, if not less than a month after Trump was elected, not even put in position yet, just elected. Trump names Jewish billionaire to head economic advisory team. Steven Schwarzman. Well, he led a 16-person strategic and policy forum. Okay, now it says he's a billionaire who founded the Blackstone Group, which, again, this isn't even about him specifically, but first I was like, Blackstone, okay. Looked it up, and I can't stop. I can't, there's a common thread here that we can't miss. Black Cube, Blackstone, BlackRock. There's something here to this. And they're all tied back to the Israeli government. Now, the Blackstone Group is another multinational private equity, alternative investment management, financial service. It's just more of the same, right? But he at the time in 2016 tapped by Donald Trump personally to lead a 16-person strategic and policy forum that will advise Trump on what? How the government policy impacts economic growth, job creation, and productivity. So at the very least, you have a 16-person forum who is influencing Trump's direction for our financial future. So what does this mean, Ryan? What do you think I'm saying? Well, guess what? Larry Fink was also on that board. BlackRock CEO Larry Fink in 2016, right? So again, just to go back, we're talking about the 2007 Israeli aspect. 2008, 2009, the country made a lot of money off of our collapse. We know that they're at least called a shadow government, shadow banking entity. Larry Fink even called that by mainstream media at the time. 2016, Donald Trump creates a 16-person task force for economic directions that includes Larry Fink on that task force, or excuse me, the forum. Right? So there's a very clear path here where he is influencing the direction of this country. Now, I could argue right off the bat that it's one of these, right off the bat, these things shouldn't be seen as bombshell, oh my gosh, because Larry Fink is considered one of the leading individuals in this financial world. So you could argue that it wouldn't be that crazy to see him on a forum like this for the president. Just to be clear, right? But all of this building together is what I'm trying to show you as usual. Not just one point that says, ooh, look, they're tied. Game over. We win. Nope, that's not ever how it works. Even if it is a bombshell, people can be like, well, here's an explanation. And sometimes it just gets put away, right? But all of it together is what we're looking at. So he puts Larry Fink on this position, which I argue at the time, he had a complete an overt influence, at the very least, over what Trump's decisions were, or rather the presidency was. I think that's been pretty clear based on their actions around this and before in the previous shows that we've done. But here's another comment that I think is really interesting. BlackRock, and this is accurate, the world's largest asset manager, maintains significant stakes in weapons companies around the world. It's the top investor in weapons manufacturers like, guess what? Lockheed Martin, Boeing, Raytheon, Northrop Grumman, General Dynamics. The products made by weapons manufacturers displace populations and create a hell of a lot more than that. Bottom line is, this guy is also invested incredibly on its face in regards to the military-industrial complex. Right? Remember that not only did they get catapulted into success and financial lucrative, whatever you want to call it, because of the 2008 collapse, which I think we should all be able to admit now was an absolutely created, coaxed, and squeezed dry agenda. Because all that happened was money left our pockets and went to all the very people who caused the problem. Yeah, sure, they solved that, right? Because here it is again. The point was, it was created, guys. We were robbed by the very people that all the people lost in the two-party paradigm scream that we need to look to for answers. Those are the people that robbed us, and they're doing it again now. Okay, now, 2 years later, after he's on this task force, forum. He's on the forum with Trump's administration. 2 years later, Donald Trump passes a tax law that allows BlackRock to hit record profits. It's a record $6 trillion of assets because of Trump's law. Now, that doesn't mean it was necessarily created because of that, or it wasn't just, the point is these are just superficial points, but all of it together should start to give you a picture of how these things are being driven. I'm not telling you to believe me. I'm telling you to go out and do your own research because it's there. Okay, then we go to 2019. Okay, 2018. After being on the forum, creates this law that gives them all the boost. 2019, BlackRock funds raise Israeli ire. Now they're talking about people, not the government. And I'll show you what it means. This I found very interesting, and this to me is more suggestive of more more than what you can see on the surface, influence and complete collaboration with the Israeli government. I find this to be very, very interesting. Now, it says foreign funds have been allowed to operate in Israel. So this is, on a surface level, an American company that is trying to operate in Israel. Now, it says foreign funds have been allowed to operate in Israel since 2016, but in order to prevent them from riding roughshod over the local fund management industry, so, smaller versions of the asset management type groups and things that BlackRock does, but on a smaller scale locally, legislation was passed that bars foreign managers from denominating their local funds in shekels. So a law was created that stops them from basically bringing in their huge, massive asset world spanning, corporation and jump in with their funds and basically take over the market. Now, BlackRock got around that problem. I got around it, right? By dual listing the 15 ETFs in Israel and Ireland. That's not only allows Israelis to buy the ETFs in shekels, but also, according to the Israel Mutual Funds Association, gives BlackRock a big tax that advantage Israelis managers don't have. So in a really weird way, this massive company is led into Israel to do something that no one's ever allowed to do. And the law says you can't, and they give them a loophole. Why would that be? The association, which had led the fight against BlackRock's plans, said that that will enable BlackRock ETFs to show a better return than some ETFs offered by Israeli investment houses. Now, for a government that seems over the top to defend and protect anything that involves an Israeli company, Israeli direction, Israeli ideology, it doesn't matter. Go out of their way to keep it from going in another direction. It doesn't, whether you're talking American or anything. So here we have an ostensibly American company that is basically pushing in the Israeli market, even against the own laws that are on the books, and they just let it happen. I find that wildly suspect. The competition right now isn't fair, it says, because BlackRock enjoys tax benefits that Israeli funds don't, including an exemption from Israeli security authorization fees. Really? This coming from somebody speaking in a condition of anonymity. Okay, so the point, guys, is, in my opinion, I hope you read the article, as all of these, there's something odd in the connection here, and why they're being allowed to do things that no one else, not even Israeli companies, are allowed to do. What does that tell you? There's something unique about this company. Something that either goes above and beyond party or, borders, or maybe is very acutely tied to one in particular. Either way you look at it, what we're talking about here is something different. Okay, now we jump to still 2019, and we already talked about this one. Now just remember the evolution of this, right? 2016, Fink is on the task for the forum in regard to economic direction. They're invested in weapons. The tax law helps them incredibly increase their money. They have very overt and obvious influence on the Israeli markets and over the top of anybody else. And while he's on this forum, right? So while Fink, the CEO of BlackRock, before they were in control of the Treasury, was on this forum, they created a plan, which I've talked about already, a plan for the bailout of this country before the crisis began. Now, you could argue maybe that they just said, "Wait, why not? Why not make a plan that just in case, even though our country's thriving and we've never been better and we're so successful," if Trump will keep telling you, but sure, let's just also make a plan for the possible collapse of that thriving country, right? Because that totally makes sense. Sure, you could argue that. But the bottom line is there's a lot of this stuff, whether the AI plan, all the things they've been using from before, this was prepped and controlled up until then. And then they told you this plan was because of coronavirus. Well, guess what? That plan rolled out in August of 2019. August of 2019. Right? We're talking 1 month after this. 1 month after this kind of, there's a clear trail here. Bottom line is they made this plan that then created the situation for them to step in for bailouts of massive companies who also have ties to all these same people from your pocket. But we'll just pretend that this wasn't some orchestrated plan. Jump forward to January 2020. Well, guess what? Larry Fink and Prince Charles are right. It's time for a reset on capitalism. Oh, weird. You mean that thing that they've been planning for? The shift of our financial direction, which benefits them, sort of like happened with Rockefeller and Standard Oil, and sort of like happened with the Flexner report. We're recreating our realities to benefit them. That's where we are. Well, January 27th, 2020, we need to reset on capitalism, right? Well, this is exactly what we're staring at. And not just the money flying out of this country to all kinds of things while Americans can't pay their bills. I told you about the Israeli bill that we just talked about. This is from Breaking Defense. Well, guess what? Sources are saying now, and I already confirmed this, that the COVID-19 pandemic is forcing Israel, to ask Washington to create major changes to the agreement, including a request to receive the annual allocation of their $3.8 billion that we keep telling you about earlier than planned. So not just over the next year, but now, right now, while you're struggling. So not only are they already agreeing to giving the money to this country, $10 million a day in the middle of this crisis, and it's to a country that does not need your money, but now they're pushing it and saying we need it now. Well, guess what? Right after this happened, right after they're saying, well, we need that money soon, I started seeing changes on the bill. What do you know? It's almost like Israel speaks, the government, and suddenly our U.S. politicians, they jump too, and they start working. Weird, right? These notifications popped up immediately. Now, just so you guys are clear on this is something I really want people to understand. This is an obviously bipartisan bill. Here is all the R's. Here are all the R's. Okay, here are the D's. What do you know? Seems about 50-50, wouldn't you say? The point is, guys, that if we actually see through the BS, it's all 50-50. It's all nonpartisan. It's all an illusion. The Israeli government says, hey, guys, we need your money sooner than you told us you could have it, even though your people don't want you to give it to us. Okay, no problem, guys. Let's start getting action right now, right? We can barely come in here and get together fully because of whatever's going on in mass and everything else. But, of course, Israel's government speaks up, and we need to make changes immediately. Don't misunderstand this, guys. This is $38 billion over 10 years, $3.8 billion a year. And they just asked for it now. It's hard to see. Now, there's only a few other points that I want to get into in regard to the other coronavirus notes that I want to share with you guys. Thank you for staying with me here today, everyone. I appreciate for the unorthodox version of these shows. I'm doing my best to stay cogent and coherent. This is some interesting stuff. But before I even get into it, I really hope that people will take the time to look into this. I mean, even the stuff I just went over in regard to BlackRock today is not, it's just only a part of the story. I've already gone over the previous videos, and I hope you'll take the time to actually look at my channel. For those that may be new, read the previous information, the previous reports, watch the videos. There's something happening here, guys. There's really something happening here. And whether this is just one part of the agenda, whether, however you want to look at the Israeli government or BlackRock, the company, or Larry Fink himself decided, hey, we're going to take advantage of this situation. It's happening. And you are being bought out right now. And of course, people are too blinded by their partisanship and their belief in one person. Talk about a savior complex. That they won't allow themselves to see it. Because you know what? If I admit that happened, well, then I'm wrong, and I can't allow that to happen, right? So I'm gonna stick with what I think makes me feel good and the comforting suffocation of the illusion of the two-party paradigm, and just pretend it's all good, right? But the problem with that is one day that comfort will go away when they no longer need to give it to you, right? When they no longer need you to care at all about what they're doing, when they have that complete control, well, that comfort won't be there anymore. That's what we're trying to fight for. That's not supposed to be scary. That's supposed to be motivating. We're supposed to realize that we, as the people, the free peoples of this planet, we don't want to be controlled and ruled by power-hungry sociopaths. We want to make our own path. The thing they pretend we already have. And this is what we all need to fight for. Now, a couple more points on coronavirus. I was going to go over this entirely, but I'm just trying to not go too long here because I kind of screwed myself last time. Explosive claims by, this is basically, I really hope you'll watch the full video. Great video by Ben Swan. More scientists are saying this is, I mean, guys, this is clearly, I mean, look, I know there's a lot of people out there that are of the mindset that this is completely fake, which, again, as I said from the beginning, we shouldn't be willing to just dismiss any possibility. And just like previous events have been, I'm not willing to just ignore the possibility that this was simply just manufactured and they did just use other scenarios happening to make it seem that way. But I argue that would be really, really difficult to do around the world without some kind of massive psyop and coordinated multinational efforts, which obviously is possible, and I'm actually leaning that direction to a lot of different reasons. But overall, I think it makes more sense to admit that there's something going on and that they simply used this. They made it with the sole purpose of creating something that would be difficult to understand, something that they could lie about so that we would be scared about it, but wouldn't necessarily destroy and potentially create the situation where it could get out of control. Right? I mean, you have to understand that as much as these people are I don't think they care about you at all. They live on this planet. They want to keep their things, right? So they would not necessarily create something that, in my opinion, that would have the potential to wildly go out of control and like end this planet, right? I mean, that makes sense. So keeping that in mind, the idea that we're continuing to see more people come out and say, look, this obvious examples of this being all the things we're already talking about, the gain of function, all of this stuff, right? I mean, these are the things that are being added for the sole purpose of creating weapons. That's what it is. And what they're seeing here is even if you want to equivocate and be like, well, they were just, it's not made in a lab. They were just tweaking it. And it was like, this is the mainstream media plays this game. It's not a bioweapon. All they did was tweak it because they were trying to make vaccines. That's the same damn thing. It's semantics. They made this thing more dangerous. They made it attached to humans, then under the guise that they need to do that to make vaccines. It's the most insulting lie to your intelligence, to all of our intelligence. They think we're stupid. But watch the video, find out for yourself that the mainstream media and the government, all of them, left, right, Trump, Pelosi, Biden, all of them, they will lie to you. They'll tell you that you need to study. Right now, Trump is playing the middle game, in my opinion. If all of his people want to pretend like he's not in support of vaccines, even though he's overtly come out and said the military will be used, said all these things, put Salawi as the vaccines are. But of course, they pretend that he's playing a game, right? It's all a big 4D chess game, and you can't see it. Must be very nice living in that fantasy world. The reality is that he's happening, that he's part of it. Look, if I end up being wrong and he is doing some grand thing to deceive all the bad guys, I'll cheer him on to the end of my life. I just don't see any evidence of that. And I'll happily admit I'm wrong, because that would mean the good thing for everybody, you see, because I'm not part of some two-party manipulation that drives me to fight for something as a win as opposed to what's best for everybody. There's so much evidence pointing to this, that there's something being done to this or that was done to this, which in my opinion then also lends credence to the idea of the so-called vaping scare in the United States that happened before all of this, or any number of weird examples of such as the untraceable case in Iran. And where did that come from? How did it even start there? I mean, Taiwan barely got touched, but yet this thing jumped 4 countries all of a sudden. I mean, it doesn't make any sense. There's clearly something happening. And they're just trying to use it to drive you into a corner, to keep you fearful. Because guess what, guys, right? Pandemic 2 is back, and it's already here. It's all your fault, just like I said in my past videos. Pelosi is now actually asking committees to exclude lawmakers not wearing masks. Right? Like now you're like, this is politics, guys. This is literally politics. This has nothing to do with, for the bottom line is they shouldn't be able to force you to do anything to your own body. Look, if you want to try, I'm not going to belabor this point, but this is a political manipulation. Not even getting into my opinion, and I've expressed it fully on the show many times, about whether masks do any good or not. The bottom line is this is about control. This is a new symbol. As I think Spiro just recently said, which I think is fantastic. Just like they said, you're the terrorist. You're either with us or you're against us. Or you're the terrorist or you're whatever, right? I forget the exact phrasing now, weirdly enough. I think it's either if you're either with us or... That's so crazy. Anyway, the point is that the new version of that is None of us are safe until we're all safe, which makes which is the most idiotic thing I've ever heard in my life. Can anybody point to me at any one point in history of the human race where every person was safe at one time? Yeah, because it's never happened. That's the whole, it's yet another endless thing. It's a war on an idea. It's something that will never come to fruition so they can use it forever. I'm interested to find out who benefited the most in regard to these mask companies or ventilators, all the things that they pushed that ended up doing more harm, and find out later that, oh, guess what? They're tied back to all these politicians. What do you know? Hey, somebody do the research for me and I'll talk about it. Tell you right now that I'm telling you there's something there. I mean, somebody right now is profiting unbelievably from masks. I wouldn't be surprised if somebody bought up all the rights or something like that before it started. I mean, who knows? There is profiteering happening in every direction right now. But Norway abandons COVID tracking over, guess what? Privacy fears. Anyone else thinking about moving to the Norwegian area? I mean, it's unreal how continually we're seeing the difference between the whole Finland, Norway, Denmark, I mean, all these different, Sweden, all these different areas where they seem to be challenging the general consensus of the scientific community, even though the general consensus of the world is way in the other direction. But they're removing them. Good for them. Because this is a huge problem. Whether there's an agenda, this is, Norway's government has an agenda, and this is, they're using it for whatever. I'm always very skeptical of any government. But it could mean that they just happen to care about your privacy. Like our governments tell us they do. But guess what, guys? We're in a situation where we're being told that it's between 0.06 and 0.26% death percentage, where the normal flu can be from 0.1 or 0.01 to far. I mean, look, right now, the COVID-19 stats coming from CDC put it anywhere from below a normal flu to a very severe flu. That's where it is. And yet they're still telling us that we need to be tracked. They're still telling us that we don't have a normal anymore. They're still telling us that we need a vaccine to go back to work. They're still telling us that we have to social distance. They're still telling us that we have to wear masks. How is anybody buying this? I don't know. And in the process, we're missing larger events that are happening. DOJ goes after Google's comment section. Problem, reaction, solution, guys. Wake up. Trump admin to propose Section 230 rollback. Oh, weird. Again, here we are again. Right? Perfect. So the DOJ goes after Google for manipulating comments. This happened to Federalist and Zero Hedge. One was demonetized. One was attacked. I mean, it's so transparent. I'm not saying that was artificial. My point is that this is, what do you think 230 is going to do? Do you realize why Google's doing this right now? It's because it's in preparation for that. The argument, the stupid narrative that they keep pushing and that people will support no matter what, is the simple idea that pushing 230, which it gives, the idea is that 230 gives these people some kind of liability. Or, immunity from liability, right? So, well, they don't have to do anything, so they can just say, okay, fine. There's some logic to that, but the problem is removing this. Well, you know what that does? When you remove that immunity, they're going to censor more, guys. They're going to censor more. Excuse me. Sorry, guys. They're going to censor more. They are going to continue to censor because now they're going to be held accountable for anything. So now they won't even need a justification to censor. Right? All they're going to do is say, well, we had to because we didn't know that comment might have been bad and they might have held us accountable for it. So they're just going to censor videos and comments and everything because now they're going to have a justification. They're going to say, well, it's now our liability. So now we are a publisher. We don't care. We're going to delete it. And you know what? That is going to push the government to push in even more. And then we're going to have a government-controlled social media platforms. And that's the new town square, like everyone squares they want. But guess what? The reason we're here to begin with is because of the government. And now we came full circle. Thanks, government, for solving the problem you started. Yeah, because that makes sense. If the government would remove itself from these platforms and give an actual free market, we might see some semblance of, look, Twitter and Google and Facebook, they're lost. These things are co-opted by the government. If we remove the monopolistic controls that they have on these things, and let real other natural organic platforms rise up, sort of how it went from MySpace to Facebook and whatever else, well, people would transition to the new thing. But they don't want that because they have control over these. So they want it to be the town square forever. James Corbett and I talked about this in the social media regulation PSYOP. We did a video about this. It is problem, reaction, solution. It's so absurd to think that Donald Trump is going to fight censorship by creating the circumstance for more censorship, right? He is creating the situation where the social media platforms will be censoring anything they'll sneeze at it. Anything that blinks, anything that looks even slightly that could cause a problem, gone immediately. All that under the guise of fighting censorship. What we need is less government manipulation, period. But anybody still lost in a two-party paradigm will argue one way or the other. Well, no, because the Democrats. And, oh, no, because Trump's trying to free us. And I said, oh, well, no, because Trump's a Nazi and he's going to censor. It's just people are lost. People are lost. But, hey, I'm fighting for you, even though you hate me. Funny how that works. But the censorship is going to continue. Mark my words. If they get any kind of momentum, this will happen. And it will change it. And it will be exactly where we said we were going to get to. But on the same note, to get into foreign policy, I could not believe this. China apparently recommitted to honoring obligations under phase 1 of the trade deal with the U.S., according to Pompeo. Okay, where are all the Trump supporters now? Because this is obscene. This is ridiculous. Here's what I said. Right. So the Chinese Communist Party was just trying to sabotage the U.S. with a virus, hiding paramount information so we all get sick, or so we're told by the likes of Mike Pompeo. And yet that's now all good, apparently. Trade deal. Right? Because that all makes sense. Hypocrisy, inconsistency, political theater. Guys, this is unreal. Look, I'm not arguing that we should go. I'm happy to see us go in the direction away from conflict or any kind of actual. What this is somebody just made this point. I think this was, I don't know, it was Corbett's video. I forget, but I made a point about North Korea and the idea that, look, we go from where North Korea is going to end the world. Oh, we're any moment now they're going to be launching nuclear weapons and it's all going to be over. And Trump's threatening nuclear attacks and it's all on the precipice of World War III. And then suddenly he has some big thing with Kim Jong-un. They're all best friends and right, whatever. So we should all be going, yay, good. I'm glad he's not doing. But it's all an illusion. Here we are with them literally. Do you believe for a second if they actually believed that what the Chinese government was trying to do was either use this to attack the country of them, which, by the way, both Trump and Pompeo, no matter what anybody says, I have it on video, clearly basically said and numerous times insinuated that that's what happened, that this was an attack on our country. The language is clear. So either they attacked us or that they just simply hid information and allowed people to die. I mean, that's what their claim is. And apparently that doesn't matter because we have a trade deal. So either that shows you that they never cared about the things they said to begin with and it was all just leverage to get the deal, or your life and things that they actually told you China were trying to do just don't matter as much as that deal. It's probably both, to be honest. But the reality is it's all leverage. This is all propaganda, political talking points and tools. It's a propaganda war, right? It's a battle. And apparently they got some leverage and they got a little bit of a deal. Now guess what? Where are all the Trump supporters who are waging a constant social media battles and wars right now to look at the Chinese party. They're trying to attack us. I mean, look, we have Bannon on radio screaming about the next war with China. And here's Pompeo meeting with them and making deals. Which it doesn't mean it won't happen again tomorrow, but the point is that this is ridiculous. If you believe even the smallest amount of rhetoric that they've been putting forward about what they think and what they're claiming China is capable of and what they're doing. I mean, think about the fact that they're screaming about the Uyghur camps. You got Muslims being put in camps, right? Okay, so if Syria was doing that, do you think that they would flip out about it? If you think Venezuela was doing that, okay, well, apparently with China, it's bad up until the point when they get what they want, then it doesn't matter anymore. Why? Because they can't just casually regime change China, right? They're too powerful for that. So they're hypocrites, guys. It's all lies. They're lying about everything that ever comes out of their mouth. Most in particular, we lie, we cheat, we steal Pompeo. I mean, all this talk about, like, you know, your friend, make sure you get the bad guys closer, right? Because that's why Pompeo and Bolton were there, because Trump's so smart to have all the bad guys right next to him, right? Clearly that's working out for you, right? This is placation. Things like Coup and Russiagate, they're placation for feeble minds. They are things that stop people from seeing the reality and allow you something that makes you feel better, right? It's an adult fairy tale. Yay, they're nice, they're good people fighting for us secretly. I hope more than anything that that's happening. But I'm not going to believe something like that without something that gives me even the smallest amount of evidence to suggest that it is happening. Of course, all of them would scream till the blue in the face about how there's so much evidence. Circumstantial, maybe. But when you're wrong about 50% of the time, yeah, you know, anyway. But I digress. The point is, this is ridiculous. They just tried to tell us that we were basically on the precipice of war because this country created a virus or they hid information, and now it's all on water on the bridge because they got leverage. Meanwhile, the other one of the great allies of the U.S. government, with the U.S. government support, just murdered 11 civilians in Yemen, right? In the middle of a pandemic, while they're in the world's worst humanitarian crisis. So not only are they in the world's worst humanitarian crisis, with a Yemeni child dying every 10 minutes, right now, by the way, right now, every 10 minutes a child is dying in Yemen because of Saudi and U.S. actions, right now. That's a fact. The UN's backed it up, the Human Rights Watch, I mean, any number of groups have backed it up. But I guess we just don't care about that, because those lives don't matter, apparently. Only some lives matter, according to our people in this country, right? And I'm not even meaning that against the Black Lives Matter. I'm talking about just in however sphere you look at. Only certain people matter in certain situations, right? You look at the idea in regard to black people being shot by police, right? The stats are clear that Native Americans are exactly the same. They're shot just as much. That's a fact, but no one cares about them, right? It's all about who you pick and choose. We are being used by political masterminds, by social engineers that have planned stuff for decades in order to get us to react. We just don't care about the Yemeni children being murdered in their families' homes by your government and their allies. Why? Because you were told Iran's there, right? You were told they do bad things. So let's go murder their families. Yay, freedom. That's where we are. 11 civilians, 4 children killed. A wave of Saudi, U.S.-backed coalition strikes. This is the U.S. coalition. They are still blockading Yemen. They are still starving Yemen. There's 1 million people suffering from a massive cholera outbreak because of their attacks on their water. This is all completely orchestrated. But no one cares now because COVID-19, right? Because we were just starting to get people to pay attention to this decades-long, devastating war against humanity. But COVID, right? Because, yeah, we're all somewhere else now. Disgusting. I mean, this, as always, of anything, gets me worked up to where I'm starting my... Anyway, it's something that really bothers me. Like, I have to, calm myself down right now because my back is killing me, and this is outrageous. Sometimes you just have to laugh. It's like the kind of thing you laugh until you cry idea. Like, I don't understand how we can pretend that these people's lives are just not important. Like, what justification could you tell them right now? Be like, well, it's okay. We killed 11 people, 4 children and their mother because Iran's there, right? We killed 11 innocent people and 4 kids with their mother because we want to put our president back in place, right? Because we don't like the Houthis. So we're going to murder families, right? And of course, on top of all of that, here's the Saudis saying, we didn't kill anybody. We've heard that before. Saudi Arabia's campaign killing huge numbers of civilians, and this is verified. I mean, the UN's verified. No one denies that Saudi bombings are killing an untold amount of people. But the Saudi strike that reportedly killed 12 people, 4 of them children, the Saudi coalition literally offered their condolences, but defending it as legal, right? So it's totally legal. All we did was say, sorry, we killed your family, but it was okay. It was legal. Why? Because the U.S. government supports us. Because it's might is right today, right? That's what it is. Peace by strength, according to Trump. That's what we're doing, right? We're strong. You got to do what you got to do, right? That's the mantra of this country today, or rather the government that's leading this country in a dangerous direction. Wednesday, the Saudis had revised the whole narrative, saying that no civilians were killed. So understand that they admitted it, then said, sorry, it was legal. Then they said, wait, no, we were wrong. Nobody died. The entire operation was completely legitimate, though, and no one died. So we take that back. I'm not kidding, by the way. That's actually what happened. The Saudis have been criticized for the large number of slain children in the war, but not too criticized. After years of Saudi officials freaking out at inclusion on the UN blacklist for nations that violate the rights of children at war, the UN has now quietly removed them from this year's blacklist. The UN has removed Saudi Arabia from a blacklist of people who violate rights of children at war. Are you kidding me? So let's not pretend like people like Blanchett on the UN, like the actual people that are completely co-opted by governments of Israel and the United States are not just completely bought out. There are plenty of nations involved with the UN, like previously we had Evo Morales with Bolivia who spoke out about all this stuff. There's plenty of people on that are fighting for things. But the actual entity itself is broken. This is like Saudi Arabia being on the UN's Human Rights Human Rights Council. They're on the Human Rights Council as they're murdering families right now. The UN says they're happy with Saudi Arabia killing somewhat fewer children this year, though in practice this is likely because it fits they have every year over. This means they never stick anyhow. That's weird. Anyway, the point is that I keep saying, okay, well, thanks, guys, for killing a few less children this time. Good, you're good people, right? But here's the point. Remember when they said this was legitimate? I wrote about this probably 5 times. And remember that Hussein al-Bukaidi, on the ground in Yemen, who I've interviewed twice, he's the one that broke that story. People like us on Last American Vagabond and independent media, we screamed about this story. No one cared about it until like a few days after when Jim Carrey made a cartoon about it. Right, because Jim Carrey's famous and people saw the cartoon. Oh, and now we care. Now it's the outrage moment of the day. And then they forgot about it the very next day, and Yemen was forgotten again, immediately. Even though there were 3 more buses full of children that were bombed the following couple weeks. I'm not kidding you. But only this one mattered. Why? Because it was a virtue signaling outrage moment. Because Jim Carrey made a cartoon about it. I'm not kidding. The bottom line was Saudi Arabia came out and said it was totally legitimate. It was totally legitimate. It was terrorists and they were using this and there's no kids. And all of a sudden it was, oh, well, there were kids, but they were there and they were holding them there. Oh, well, no, they weren't. It was a school bus and we're sorry and it was an accident, right? That's the evolution, just like now. And I swear to you, I'm not making this up. Saudi Arabia is horrible at this stuff. And I think it's because they just don't care. I think they know they've got impunity. But they came out and they lied through their teeth about this. And it was completely revealed. They murdered 40 children on a school bus, not on a bus with other people. Terrorists didn't bring children on a bus. This was a school bus. Children were with backpacks and everything and were going to school. The Saudi U.S. supplied U.S. coalition murdered 40 children on this bus. They lied about it. They said it was legitimate up until it was proven that it wasn't. So please let that reflect on where we are now with this story, as they just murdered 11 people, 4 children with their mother. Totally legitimate, but we're sorry about it. And the next day they go, well, we're not sorry. There was no kids or nobody there, but it was legitimate. This is what your government supports as an American. This is what they support. It's sickening. Absolutely sickening. In the meantime, U.S. imposes new sanctions on the Syrian regime. Thanks for pushing your opinion out there and world, including Assad and his wife. Right? So U.S. sanctions. So they're burning their wheat fields. Turkey's burning their wheat fields, burning their other crops, stealing their oil, bombing Damascus left and right from Israel, violating, everything you could possibly imagine. And nothing has been happening from out of Syria, right? Remind me what Syria's done over the last 6 months, right? They're taking their own territory back. They're fighting the terrorists on their territory. Now, even if you disagree that those are those aren't terrorists, those are freedom fighters. Okay, well, they're still illegally occupying Syrian territory. There's nobody that denies that except the U.S. and Israeli governments because they want to pretend that because Assad bad guy, that doesn't matter anymore. That doesn't mean anything. This is the U.S. government propaganda on feeble minds in this country that buy and gobble up anything they say without actually caring to actually look at the international law or what things actually, anything. You don't get to just be like, that guy's bad guy, so we can invade country. That's not how that works. The Syrian government was voted in. Assad was voted in again, by the way. The people support him. Now, you could argue that that's a fake election. Well, then prove it, because they keep saying that and they've never once proven it, because it's not, by the way. All intents and purposes, everything I can see over decades of, just to put it, a decade of watching this, it's very clear to me that the Syrian people overwhelmingly support Assad. And it makes every sense in the world to me, based on what you see that the mainstream media won't show you about how these places were when the U.S. government was occupying them. Terrorist run. ISIS signs everywhere. People being raped and murdered and attacked. That's what the very thing that they're trying to pretend is what they're creating elsewhere. Or the other people, right? This is the reality. And every time Assad takes place back, the people rush back into their territory. So nothing has happened. The U.S. governments continue to do things. So they're just getting mad because they're not getting what they want. So they sanction Syria. Think about how disgusting that is. Again, that not only are unilateral sanctions illegal, but it's even more unjustified to do it punitively. To say, well, we're not going to do this because you need to be punished. Not because we're trying to drive an action from you. No. It's because we just want to hurt you. And by the way, those sanctions overwhelmingly hurt the civilian population. And that's the point. Period. That's the point. That's why they're designed like that. They do it so they hurt the people, as I've told you over and over and over. But they then say, we're fighting for the people. Why would they starve them and burn their food and steal their oil and shoot them and bomb them? We're fighting for them, though. He also said, we anticipate many more sanctions and will not stop until Assad and his regime stop their needless, brutal war on the Syrian people. I mean, good God, guys, I don't even really think that people in their circles buy that anymore. This is next level fantasy. This is the kind of thing, these kind of statements are made to people that they're trying to, the lowest common denominator. They're trying to push that line out to the Trump supporters, out to the people out there that are blinded on the left, people that want to be completely lost in their party politics. A brutal war against the Syrian people. That's what the U.S. government is doing. There is no evidence to show that anything that ever happened there in regard to this war was anything other than Syria defending its interests. Now, I'm not going to claim that Assad or his government didn't do things that I would consider bad or that he should be held accountable for. But that's irrelevant in regard to the obvious lies we know. If he was actually this person and they actually had the evidence they claim, it would be all across the news. It would be everywhere. They would say, here it is, here it is, here it is. And the reason they don't is because most of the things they want you to look at are things that they know that were fabricated, that are very easy to see. Such as the original protests where people were shot that they blamed on Assad. That was completely proven to be fake. It's the U.S. government that did that. Across the board, this should be clear to us by now. But what are you going to do? They're going to keep lying and pretend that he's literally fighting his own people. As every single time they take an area back, those people rush back in. And this, of course, is using the Caesar Act, which I called out at the time. And I told you this is how it would be used. It's going to be used to continue the war against Syria, period. That's all it's about. Now, think about for a moment, guys, the idea that they're doing this for the Syrian people, right? We're fighting for the Syrian people. We're trying to save the Syrian people. That's their narrative. Okay, so you could argue that it's in the best interest of the Syrian people to remove this despotic leader, right? That'll be the best. Even if it hurts them in the process, it'll be best for them if we get him out of the way, right? That's what they want you to think. Okay, so taking at face value that flimsy narrative as it is, even if that's the case, at some point along the line, if everything is continuing to hurt the people and every single time it's not removing Assad, at what point do you go, okay, well, it's more important to us to get Assad out of the way than to actually help the people, right? So you can see what I'm saying. Even if they even care about the people, which I argue they don't at all, it's clear to everyone by now that the agenda of removing Assad outweighs the concern for the people. The concern for the people, even if you think it's secondary, is secondary to removing Assad. Because if it weren't, they would realize by now that this is far too catastrophic for the people, and the situation was better before when it doesn't matter. They will choose their agenda over what they claim they're trying to do every day of the week. Now, this is interesting. In regard to Israel, taking a step down, Netanyahu mulls two-phase West Bank annexation. Oh, great. Two-phase West Bank annexation. Great, so you're not going to do it all at once. We'll just do it slowly. That makes it a little bit less illegal? No, not at all. It's the same thing done slowly. So it's just as illegal. So it's just really, they're trying to manipulate you. And think about how crazy it is that we have the world standing up. France saying something, multiple countries around the world, which is probably really upsetting for the US and Israel, saying you can't do this. It's illegal. It's wrong. Even if they have another agenda on why they're doing it, it's still happening. And so instead of going, okay, guys, I can see that I'm obviously a criminal and that everyone disagrees with this and everyone says it's wrong and the UN tells me it's wrong, instead of saying I'll just not do it then, I'm just going to say, okay, we'll just do it slower. We'll span it out across 2 months. So it's like, did they say you were doing it too fast, or did they say this is an illegal act of a crime? It's just so silly to pretend like spanning it out further or breaking it into 2 phases is somehow all the U.S. government's going to be okay with that. They were okay with the illegal action to begin with. The point is, they're off the rails, guys. These people do not care about they're not bound by the law. They don't care about the law. They don't care about morals. They do what they want and they take what they want. That's what we need to fight this country or the world back from. We need to fight the world from the hands of these kind of people because they've taken it. Oh, I guess I mixed these up in the wrong spot. Why the Caesar Act and how will new U.S. sanctions impact Syria? And this is an interesting point. The United States has imposed a sweeping set of new sanctions against any country, individual or entity that provides support to the Syrian government. A campaign that experts warn may devastate the lives of ordinary Syrians trying to survive and rebuild after 9 years of war. Anybody. Of course, the 9 years of war are because of the U.S. government invasion, right? So clearly the U.S., I mean, the argument before was that Assad was a bad guy, right? That he's shooting people and he's hurting people. Okay, even if it was true, which it wasn't, by the way, even if it was true, you can clearly argue that the country was way better off before the over 9-year invasion. But of course, because Assad, bad guy, all the things they did to destroy the country over the 9 years, it's all his fault, right? Sort of how all those starving people in Iran, well, that's your fault for not doing what we told you to do, right? Your people are going to starve until you do what we tell you, and that's your fault. What a bad person you are, right? I mean, that's actually how they frame it, even though they're the ones creating the actions and starving people, or in this case, destroying Syrian lives. The Caesar Act passed, and again, recognize that this is not just against Syrians. Anybody that goes against this and does something against this thing, they will attack. Politically, militarily, however you want to look at it. Even their allies, which we're already seeing. Now it says the Caesar Act passed in Congress last year took effect on Wednesday. That's why we're seeing it now, right? The moment they have sanctions, based on what? Based on the fact that they're trying to overthrow Syria. That's what it is. Punitive. It's pressure. That's what it is. Which is just wrong, right? Nothing has happened. And the whole guy is that sanctions are some kind of tool to create change. It's such an insulting lie. It seeks to pressure Syrian President Assad into negotiations with Washington while preventing foreign allies from assisting the reconstruction of Syria's devastating cities. So basically allowing the people to continue to suffer, right? There are numerous countries that want to go in and help rebuild the country, and the U.S. won't allow it. Why? Because they don't want Assad there. So again, they're choosing the objective over an active current situation where people want to help the Syrian people. Nope, sorry. We're going to leverage their problems, their suffering, over what we want. Because we care about the Syrian people. Isn't that clear? It targets the supporters of the Assad government in politics, business, banking, right? Because they don't like him. Our government is a problem. Like really bad. And that's not to say that other governments aren't bad or just as bad. But as an American, I care more about what we achieve in this country than I do collectively just because of where I am. And that's not even because I think I have a motivation to improve this country more so than the world. It's just because, maybe it's partly selfish because I live in this country, because I'm here right now and my family's here, right? The things that we can change, I will physically see. I mean, I think I hit on the head right there. It's because my family's here. It's because people that I care about deal with these things immediately in this country, right? So I have a vested interest in trying to improve this first. And through that, hopefully extrapolate that out to the world. And we can change we need to remove these kind of governments and people. And start with our own. And we'll set the example for how things could be. Israel increases secretive nuclear stockpile. Secretive. I was just talking about this the other day. It's still, even though he accidentally admitted it in a meeting not too long ago and made this really weird, creepy smile after he said it, It's a joke. We all know it. And in this, they call it nuclear opacity. Maybe that's like maybe that's the official term. I've been using nuclear ambiguity. I've seen both used. But the bottom line is, Israel continues to maintain its long-standing policy of nuclear opacity. It neither officially confirms nor denies that it possesses a weapon. Only country in the world that's allowed to do that. You tell me why. Why is that the only country in the world that's allowed to have such an interesting stance on a very, very contentious point? And seeing as how they stole that from the U.S. government. And this is from SIPRI. Again, this is always the group that I keep telling you about that you should look into. SIPRI is the group that continues to point out that the U.S. government sells weapons to about 70% of the world's dictators. Think about how hypocritical that is. To pretend that you're fighting for freedom and trying to stop the bad guys while you then turn around and sell weapons to the vast majority of the world's bad guys. Isn't that funny? The only reason you may not know that is because you're only listening to mainstream media and maybe lost in the two-party paradigm. Anyone that's listened to this show has heard me mention that 1,000 times. It's very easy to look into. How do you explain that? There's probably some ridiculous claim for why, why each group is not as bad. But the reason they don't talk about it is because these are really small, obvious authoritarian dictatorships all around the world that then immediately go on to use these to hurt people, commit genocide, ethnically cleanse areas. It's happening all over the place. And really, it has for a long time. And of course, some of the chief ones were Saudi Arabia, Israel. But we're not allowed to say that, right? There's clearly a problem here, guys. And we need to realize that there's people who are in control. And I argue that it really has nothing to do with any government or any country. There's a larger power structure, an unelected power structure that is indeed moving things. Now, I do definitely feel that there's a clear Zionist entity to this, which would explain why we have this overwhelming number of people that are Zionist Christians in this country, or a lot of different places. And no, that doesn't just mean Jewish people. We're talking about a specific Israeli government agenda. That's why the Israeli government using Zionism, or rather Zionism using the Israeli government, hijacked the idea of Judaism. These are contentious points. I've talked about them numerous times. But despite what anybody tries to say, this is not some secret wink-wink discussion about all Jewish people. It's simply not. I find that to be ridiculous. Even though there is discussions to be had about different things, such as dual loyalty. Things that Donald Trump himself has talked about, but we're not supposed to be allowed to talk about. These are things that apply to anybody, anywhere. If a Saudi is in the United States and becomes an American citizen, does he have dual loyalty to Saudi Arabia and the United States? Probably. The only country you're not allowed to point that out about is Israel. Why? They want to make that about me pointing wink, wink over to the Jewish people. That's not what I'm doing. But see, this is what they're afraid of. They're afraid of people who are smart enough to see that this is a very, very clear government agenda. A political, ideological agenda, let's put it. Because I do think it goes beyond any one government. But at the end of the day, it is not about what they try to bastardize it into. We're watching the takeover of our country right now, and it has nothing to do with the idea of racism or anything like that. They're using that, sure. They're using it to trick you. Here's another example. Here's Boris Johnson. For whatever reason, I'm not saying he suddenly turned a new leaf. Who knows why he's saying it? Israeli annexation breaches international law. You're damn right it does. It always has, from the very beginning. And that's never changed. But here's what I found so interesting, right? So on the 16th, Boris Johnson says, as far as I can tell, one of the first times I've seen it come from the UK like this, maybe I'm wrong, Israeli annexation breaches international law, according to Johnson. The next day, Boris Johnson in a minor car accident outside the parliament after a protester runs in front of convoy. Who knows? Could be nothing. Or maybe someone just trying to tell him where he needs to be. How the world really works. Turkey sends special forces into Iraq against PKK militants despite Baghdad's outrage. So here we have Turkey burning wheat fields in Syria, and now they're even sending in military troops, ground troops, into Iraq. Why is nobody paying attention? Are we just going to pretend like there's not an obvious NATO agenda playing out right in front of us? At the behest of the Israeli government, it would seem. This is unreal. Now, I know on the surface level, Turkey and Israel have this fight that's going on, but, I've never felt that was too genuine. There's clear ties behind with both of them. But this is crazy that we can watch these things play out. Why is Turkey suddenly like, no one seems to care? It's like Turkey's like a bad guy / good guy. So it's like, well, when he's over here invading Syria and Trump ordered the U.S. to burn wheat fields in Syria, but it got very little attention. Turkey goes in there like flagrantly, so waving their burning things and screaming. And I'm kind of being facetious, but it was very loud and obvious. And the point is, why is Turkey doing this or invading Iraq? And like no one seems to care because there's an agenda. Right? Isn't it funny how the mainstream media suddenly gets all angry at Turkey when they push into Syria when they weren't supposed to, but now that it's all part, I mean, if they cared about one, they would care about the other, but they don't. All of this is an illusion. All of it, guys. It is all building towards something. Now, I have plenty of theories on what that is, and I've told you most of them. But the bottom line is we can see it all coming together from all the different angles. Why is it that they've always continued to go after these countries? Iraq, Syria, Iran. There's clearly an agenda. Because the narrative has changed, right? You go back 20 years, it was a totally different claim than what they're doing now. But it's always the same actions. Because the agenda never changed, only the narrative changed. Because they're fooling you like they always have. And now we have another NATO ally. Think about how crazy it is that we have the U.S. government supposedly occupying Iraq. Right? They're supposedly allies, which is just so offensive. But, because Iraq voted them to leave and they said, no, we respect your sovereignty, but hell no, you can't tell us what to do. They're occupying, they're controlling them. It's a vassal state of the U.S. government. And now Turkey, a NATO ally, is pushing into Iraq as they're supposedly under the protection of the U.S. government? Is it just a free-for-all? It's the same reason they're letting Israel come into Iraq and shoot and literally work from within a bases in Iraq, from U.S. bases, and bomb places in Iraq. That's happened already from Israel. That's the fake fight with Iran against the PK, or the Kataib Hezbollah, right? PMU. It's just crazy to see. And the last thing to leave you with here today, hopefully that will really accentuate the points we were telling you about the bombing of Yemen and the murder of families and the Saudi Arabia and the whole thing. The Human Rights Council with Saudi Arabia and all the different stuff that we talked about. Donald Trump rips up a decades-old WMD treaty. Why? So he can sell drones to Saudi Arabia. Right? So who cares about the fact that these things have maybe ostensibly held off the action of, the growing nuclear threat, which could destroy the entire planet? Right, who cares about any of that? Let's just tear up the treaty, one more, right? And guess what? There's no narrative here. There's no Russia's the one that did it, and we're leaving because Russia bad guy, or China's not a part of it, and we can't do that, or, whatever the lie is that they sell you to get out of the things that they've continued to break. No, this one is just, well, we don't care about treaties. We don't care. We have no honor, apparently. I know we signed it, but who cares? Tear it up because we want to make money, because we want to sell things to the obvious, most clear authoritarian dictatorship in the world. Right? The country that is easily the biggest problem in regard to terrorism. But let's pretend like we're fighting terrorism and work with them. Totally makes sense. Right? This is the country that just murdered 11 people, 4 children in Yemen, just now. And here's Trump. Who cares? Right? Let's sell them more things. So the Trump administration decided to break the 33-year-old missile technology control regime treaty. Right? Now, technically, it's still present. But think about what it shows you. That you can have a treaty that, by the way, that they would hold other countries to, possibly by the threat of military action, as they've done before. Just because he wants to sell weapons to Saudi Arabia, he goes, screw it, who cares? We can do what we want. We're not bound by those treaties. Those treaties are for the weak people that are underneath us. These treaties aren't for us, right? We don't care about the INF. We don't care about the space treaty. We don't care about any of these treaties. Treaties in regard to North or Taiwan. A number of things that they've put on paper that they have a certain stance, and then because they just decide to change it, who cares? In order to sell high-tech American drones to whomever it wants. Like the other 70% of the world's dictators. First on that list, Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, a couple of glowing bastions of democracy, right? Jordan, Romania. As they point out, the INF treaty and on. It's unreal to be in this position, to see so clearly. And of course, the problem is that people have been convinced that it's only Trump, right? That Biden will save us all, or whatever ridiculous narrative is in their head, even though they're both part of the same problem. And the other side is convinced that he's the savior, that he has to act and do things differently because we're trying to blah, blah, blah. Everyone's lost who is still taking part of that paradigm. Meanwhile, it all keeps marching forward. And sadly, at the very least, they will see it once something goes to something new, right? I mean, and now think about with Obama. There are people right now that still swear up and down that Obama would have changed the world if only the Republicans hadn't stopped him. Well, we look forward to 4 years of that. Trump was going to save the world if only you guys didn't stop him, right? That's what's going to happen. Because people will never want to admit that they were fooled. You don't just rip up a decades-old weapons of mass destruction treaty in order to sell weapons to one of the most obvious authoritarian regimes in the world if you're fighting for freedom. If you care at all about your word, if you care at all about, the honor of what this country's supposed to represent. And why is anyone anywhere going to make a deal with this country? Look, there's North Korea giving you a good example of why they won't, because they know what those treaties stand for. Nothing. Toilet paper. They're good right up until the moment they're no longer useful for the government that made them. Thank you for tuning in today, guys. I'm hoping this stuff will get out to people. Hoping it'll reach more people. There's so much that happens every day. And so much that I feel like sometimes I just can't get to, especially right now where I'm going stir crazy trying to get this stuff done. And this takes a lot out of me, but I wanted to make sure that I brought this to you so you guys could research. But as I said in the beginning, don't worry. Just a matter of time until I can be, fully sitting up and set up correctly. Well, then I'll be right back at it the same way as I always was. Don't worry. I'm not going anywhere. And for those that are concerned, I think we asked, Whitney Webb is also fine. So I asked the other day again. She's in the process of moving. There's stuff happening. She's totally fine. She will be back at it soon enough. We're trying to get her set up with internet and all the different things. It's all good. Of course, it just perfectly times with everything else that happened, and the website's being attacked, and, I end up slipping like an idiot out of filming a protest, Stuff happens, But thank you for all being here, and thank you for taking the time to continue to be a part of this and ask questions and show people that there are those of us out here that care about what's going on. Those of us that do think about the reality behind the situation and don't just take your partisan talking orders from the partisan talking heads. I truly love you guys for being here, thinking for yourselves. As always, guys, question everything. Come to your own conclusions. Stay vigilant.
I want to make the case for secrecy in government when it comes to the conduct of national security affairs, and possibly for deception.
You would lie in order to preserve the truth.
If I had to say something I knew was false to protect American national security, I would do it.
But you took an oath to uphold the Constitution, and the Constitution mandates certain openness and certain fairness. You're willing to do away with that in order to achieve a temporary military goal?
The Constitution's not a suicide pact.
But you took an oath to it.
I don't make any apology for it.
When I was a cadet, what's the cadet motto at West Point? You will not lie, cheat, or steal, or tolerate those who do. I was the CIA director. We lied, we cheated, we stole. It was like we had entire training courses.
Speaking of psychopath politicians that would like your vote in the fall, candidates pledge support for Israel in identical propaganda videos. At least 13 of what seems like hundreds of drones all running for America's Next Top President 2020 recorded videos of themselves for this year's American Jewish Committee Global Forum, which just wrapped up, I believe, yesterday. All the candidates except 2 spoke in support of Israel, many claiming it as an important American ally. All of them ignored Israel's pattern of spying on the U.S., stealing American technology, attacking the USS Liberty, the cost of Israel to Americans, the role of Israel partisans, and pushing the U.S. into disastrous wars, stuff like that. The only candidates who did not explicitly mention Israel were Tulsi Gabbard, that's Hawaii's Pepsi candidate, and Cory Booker, the New Jersey Pepsi, whose videos focus more on opposition to anti-Semitism. So it's the same thing, really, if they even didn't say the I word. It should be noted, James, that the U.S. currently gives Israel about $10 million a day. A bill before the Senate that Kamala Harris is a super fan of would up that number to basically $7,000 a minute.
Maybe this happens on a regular basis with all sorts of other countries. So I'm just asking people out there, please dig up any other country on the planet to which every politician is expected to line up and pay fealty to. And in that case, I'll go, oh, okay, well, it's just something that politicians do. But I can't think of any other group, any other lobby, any other country to which every politician has to bow down like this in such a public way. It's gives you pause for thought.